Once upon a time, in a sieve and straw, in a distant land, there was a huge kingdom. In this kingdom lived a beautiful queen. The queen's biggest dream was to have a child one day. One winter day, while the queen was sitting in front of the palace's large window, it started to snow. The white snowflakes were falling to the ground, and the queen was sewing a piece of fabric with a needle. At that moment, she carelessly stuck the needle into her hand, and a few drops of blood fell onto the snow-white snow. At that moment, the queen made a wish. "I wish I had a daughter, with skin as white as snow, cheeks as red as blood, and hair as black as ebony." After a while, the queen's wish came true. She gave birth to a beautiful baby girl and named her Snow White. Unfortunately, Snow White's mother did not live very long and died at a young age. After a long period of mourning, the king married another queen. This new queen was very beautiful, but she was also very arrogant and jealous. Her favorite thing to do was to stand in front of her magic mirror every day and ask it, "Mirror, mirror, tell me, is there anyone more beautiful than me in this world?" The mirror would always answer her, "You, my queen, are the most beautiful in this world." The queen would become happier as she heard this answer, and she would feel like the most beautiful woman in the world. Years passed, Snow White grew up and became a young girl. The whiteness of her skin, the blackness of her hair, and the redness of her cheeks became more beautiful every day. One day, the queen asked her mirror again, "Mirror, mirror, tell me, is there anyone more beautiful than me in this world?" But this time the mirror gave a different answer. "You are beautiful, my queen, but Snow White is more beautiful than you." When the queen heard this answer, she trembled with anger. Her jealousy burned inside her like a fire. From that moment on, she began to hate Snow White and wanted to get rid of her. She called the huntsman in the palace to carry out her plan. He ordered the hunter to take Snow White to the forest and kill her there. At first, the hunter did not want to fulfill this terrible order, but he had to obey because he was afraid of the queen. One day, the hunter took Snow White to the forest. Snow White was so naive that she was happily walking in the forest, unaware of the hunter's intentions. Just as the hunter was about to kill her, Snow White begged him, "Please, don't hurt me. I haven't harmed anyone. Leave me here. I will never come back to the palace again." When the hunter saw the innocence in Snow White's eyes, he could not kill her. "Run away? Never come back again?" he said, and left Snow White in the forest. Snow White began to wander in the depths of the forest, not knowing what to do. The forest was dark, silent, and scary. The branches of the trees looked like giant creatures in the darkness. However, Snow White bravely walked forward and did not give up, no matter how tired she was. Finally, she saw a small cottage among the trees. The door of the cottage was ajar. Snow White entered quietly. Everything in the hut was very small. A small table, 7 small chairs, and 7 small beds. Snow White was very tired, so she sat at the table and ate a bite of the food she found on the table. Then she lay down on one of the 7 small beds and immediately fell into a deep sleep. When it was night, the 7 dwarfs living in this hut finished their work from the mine and returned home. When they opened the door, they noticed a change in the hut. Some of the food on the table had been eaten and someone had laid down on the bed. They slowly walked over to the bed and saw Snow White. The dwarfs were very surprised to see this beautiful girl. They asked each other, "Who is this young girl?" When Snow White woke up, she told the dwarfs what had happened to her. The 7 dwarfs felt sorry for Snow White and offered her to stay in their hut. Snow White accepted. The dwarfs told her to stay in the hut every day when they went to the mine and not to open the door to anyone, because they knew that the queen would be looking for her. Meanwhile, the queen sat in front of her mirror in her palace and asked once more, "Mirror, mirror, tell me, is there anyone in the world more beautiful than me?" The mirror replied, "You are beautiful, my queen, but Snow White, who lives with the 7 dwarfs behind the mountains, is more beautiful than you." When the queen heard this, she realized that Snow White was still alive and went crazy with anger. This time, she decided not to take any chances. In order to kill Snow White, she disguised herself as an old peasant woman and prepared a poisoned apple. Then she set off towards the dwarf's hut. The queen went to the dwarf's hut disguised as an old peasant woman. Snow White remembered the dwarf's warnings and was determined not to open the door. However, the old woman's cute and harmless appearance deceived Snow White. The queen called out to her in a sweet voice, "My beautiful daughter, I brought you some fresh apples. They grew in my garden. Won't you taste them?" Snow White hesitated at first, but when she saw the apple in the old woman's hand, she couldn't resist. The apple was so bright and red that it looked exactly like she liked it. The queen held out the apple, and Snow White took it and took a bite. But at that moment, Snow White's eyes went black. She fell to the ground and fell into a deep sleep. This apple was the poisoned apple prepared by the queen. When the queen saw Snow White lying lifeless on the ground, she laughed and walked away. "I am the most beautiful now," she said happily. When she returned to the palace, she went in front of her mirror and asked again, "Mirror, mirror, tell me, is there anyone more beautiful than me in this world?" The mirror finally gave her the answer she wanted. "You, my queen, are the most beautiful in this world." When the dwarfs returned home in the evening, they found Snow White motionless on the ground. They tried everything to wake her up, but in vain. Snow White wouldn't wake up. Thinking that she was dead, they were deeply saddened. With tears in their eyes, they put Snow White in a beautiful glass coffin and placed her on a hill in the middle of the forest. They came to the coffin every day and watched over her. Days, months, years passed, but Snow White never aged. Her beauty remained the same inside the glass coffin. One day, a young and handsome prince from a distant land was traveling in this forest. While walking in the forest, he came to the dwarves and saw Snow White inside the glass coffin. He was enchanted by Snow White's beauty and approached her. The prince was very upset when he learned Snow White's story from the dwarves. With a deep love for her, he leaned over and kissed Snow White's forehead. That's when the magic was broken. Snow White suddenly took a deep breath, opened her eyes, and woke up. While the dwarves and the prince looked at her in surprise, Snow White smiled gently. When Snow White looked at the prince who saved her, she thanked him sincerely. The prince expressed his love for Snow White and proposed to her. Snow White accepted the prince's offer. The dwarfs were also very happy about this and had a big celebration. Snow White and the prince returned to the palace and had a big wedding. The evil queen heard about this wedding and went crazy with anger. However, she had to face her own evil and escaped from the palace and disappeared. Snow White and the prince lived a happy and peaceful life in the kingdom. The dwarfs visited them often, and their friendship never broke. They got their wish. Let's go to bed. 3 apples fell from the sky, 1 for the one who tells, 1 for the one who listens, and 1 for everyone who has a good heart.